Hello everybody. I hope you had some fresh, nice coffee or tea or whatever you prefer. Heartily welcome to this panel on gender-based violence online, a topic that actually has been mentioned several times already this morning, which has made us and many others very happy. Because violence is very often used to silence women who raise their voices, threatening their freedom of expression and democracy at large. And there is an alarming global trend, as we all know, of shrinking space for civil society and democracy on decline. This is something that is visible in all public arenas, including the internet. And women are among the most targeted. Female journalists, politicians, and women's human rights activists withdraw, and also individual women acting in their own respect, withdraw from online discussions and conversations due to threats and violence. Over the past few years, online gender-based violence has moved from a peripheral discussion in both the women's rights and internet rights communities to occupy now a central space in the conversations about a free and open internet. And this morning has actually been an example of that it's actually in the core now of the discussions. Whether in the context of the chilling effect it has on freedom of speech or its function as a barrier to women's access to the internet, gender-based violence online has achieved global recognitions. But while there is now some level of agreement about the need to respond, there is little when it comes to how. This panel today is the fourth in a series of events organized by CIDA with the aim to shed light on and develop counter strategies against gender-based violence online. The first of these events was a roundtable discussion initiated by our Director General and the State Secretary Maja Fjärstad, gathering Swedish partners working in these areas. And the second panel was here at SIF 2 years ago with international partners, including APC and JAN. And we were just talking about that during the break, that we really see a difference compared to SIF 2 years ago when it comes to bringing up online gender-based violence as a core threat to freedom of expression and internet access. The third in this series was a development talk at CIDA last year, where we gathered also international CIDA partners from countries severely affected by the shrinking space. And so we had women human rights activists talking about the effects and impact of gender-based violence online. And one of the conclusions from this development talk was that the answer to gender-based violence online in an era of shrinking space must be to, quote, come together, speak louder, and be more visible. And this panel today is a great opportunity to do exactly this. Come together, speak louder, and be more visible. And to take new steps in the discussion on how to act against gender-based violence online. My name is Åsa Eldén, and I'm the lead policy specialist on gender equality at CIDA. And I am very, very proud to present a most distinguished panel with me here today, extremely well equipped to take lead in the discussions on how to move forward. And I'm very proud to, first of all, present Mrs. Dubravka Simonovic, who is the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. She was appointed to this position in June 2015. And Dubravka has a very, very long experience in women's rights, human rights, in several UN bodies. I cannot spend the whole panel but with your extremely long series, but I will make it very, very brief for all of you. And she has worked in many UN bodies and the Croatian government, OSCE, and also the Council of Europe, and she also holds a PhD in family law. I also have with me Frane Marovic, who is the director of the Office on Freedom of Media, Freedom of the Media at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. And he has also many, many years of experience in media and international organizations. For example, as a journalist, spokesperson for the EU, Director of Communications for High Representatives in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Most welcome, both of you. I also have with me Annika Ben-David, who is the Swedish Ambassador for Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law. She has been a diplomat in the Swedish Foreign Service since '96, with postings in Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and she has also been the ambassador for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And she
but two.
Oh, I'm so sorry for my ignorance when it two. Okay. And now you're ambassador for something, and you were ambassador to, exactly. Yeah. The diplomatic language. I'm sorry for my ignorance. Okay, and last and not least, we have Jan Mollman with us, as 2 years ago, and we're very happy to have you back. She is a feminist activist who has worked on the intersection of women's rights, technology, and human rights for almost a decade, and with specific focus on gender-based violence. And she's currently the Global Women's Rights Policy Lead at the Association for Progressive Communications, APC. And Jan is based in Johannesburg in South Africa. Most welcome, all of you, again. And the format of this session will be, as the last one, open. We will have a discussion, not formal presentations, and you are also, throughout the session, most welcome to interfere and contribute with comments and questions or criticism even. So we will throughout the session open up for the audience, of course, also. And we will discuss these questions from 3 different angles. I hope we will have time to cover them all. And the first one is the forms and understandings of gender-based violence. What is it that we need to address? The second one is the impact it has in different contexts and for different issues, and how we need to address it. And the third one is the role of different stakeholders in this process of addressing gender-based violence online. And I will first turn to Dubravka as a special rapporteur, and I know that you have a very interesting announcement to make that will be a perfect point of departure for our discussion. So please, Dubravka.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here and to participate in this forum. And my announcement is related to work of my mandate, because when I started as Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its Causes and Consequences in 2015, I have elaborated my plan of work, and I have announced that my thematic report is going to focus on online violence against women. Now I am focusing on preparation of that report that will be planned for next year, June next year, and presented to Human Rights Council. For that reason, I am really happy to be here and to listen to all of you, to collect as much as possible from this forum and from your work in this area of online violence against women, because I think that we are at the process of still trying to find the best way how to apply women's human rights agenda and human rights framework in this area of online violence against women. And let me start by saying that this is extremely important for my mandate, to apply women's human rights and to see violence against women as a human rights violation and form of discrimination against women. And how we are then dealing with online violence. I think that online violence and offline violence are violence against women, and they are discrimination against women. So they should be looked as different forms that are now coming from online violence against women. How violence is committed by use of internet, by different platforms, how this is facilitated by internet, and how different crimes are aggravated if perpetrators are using internet as a platform. There are many challenges in this area, and we have to see how to focus also on responsibilities of perpetrators, but also of states, because there is a state responsibility to prevent violence against women, to provide services to women victims of violence, and to punish perpetrators, be it private persons or be it non-state actors like those big platforms holders. So I think that we have many challenges, and at the beginning I would like to say that I really rely on inputs from those that have developed research and work in this area. And I would like to invite all of you to send me your materials, your research, your data on different forms of violence against women that you are dealing with, that you are seeing, concrete cases. And then we should look into direction of really producing something that would focus on application of human rights, universal human rights, women's human rights agenda on online violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I mean, this is really a great opportunity for us to feed into this report of you, which is, I mean, the thematic reports of the special rapporteurs are always very, very useful and also very influential in fields. So we're very much looking forward to this, and this is a great news that you will be focusing on.
And you can find my address on Office of the High Commissioner's website. It is under Special Procedures, Special Rapporteur, and then you will see linkages where you can send those information and reports. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will immediately give the floor to Jan to give the spontaneous input into this into this report. What forms of violence do we need to talk about when we are addressing online violence?
Okay. I'd first really like to say how thoroughly thrilled we are that your next thematic report will focus on online gender-based violence. And I think, again, it speaks to the critical moment that we are in right now, where recognition has happened. The fact that there's so many people in this room speaks volumes, because 4 years ago, there might have been 15. So thank you, everybody, for, again, affirming that the moment is now and the recognition has happened. I think that there are many kinds of many forms of online gender-based violence that we need to look at, and many of you are experts, so I also hope you'll be sharing some of those. One of the main issues that APC is now trying to respond to is around non-consensual dissemination of images, what many people refer to as revenge porn, but which we really try to counter, because it's not about revenge and it's not about pornography. It really is about a very deliberate privacy violation with the aim of either discrediting women, blackmailing women, and those kinds of things. things that I think people in this room probably know a lot of is around online harassment. Thousands and thousands of comments when you say something that you are not meant to say because you live in a woman's body. If you live in a woman's body, if you are a black woman, if you live in a trans body, if you live in any kind of body that is outside of the norm, we know that these are the kinds of experiences that you have online. It's extortion and blackmail, which we also know and hear about. And it's not only in the context of people that we don't know, but often it is in these intimate spaces. It's in the context of domestic violence and abuse. It's ex-lovers and partners, people who we've cared about, people who we have very consciously, developed videos with, taken beautiful erotic photos with, which suddenly are then taken out of a moment of intimacy and into a moment in which you are meant to experience deliberate harm. And something that is very close to me in the region that I come from is the dissemination of rape videos. And I don't think it's only in Africa, but we also see a lot of this in Asia and Latin America. And I think the secondary victimization that comes out of this really needs a very strong response. And often we think that the response has to come from women. We get the response of, well, why did you take the video in the first place? For me, that equates, well, why did you wear a short skirt when you were walking down the road? So I think it's very important to see the continuum of violence against women, to see the root causes are exactly the same. And as we go on in this life that we live, to see that there is a blurring of the online and the offline. We love online as much as we love offline. Many of us who are traveling are speaking to our partners and our children at home. So it's very difficult to separate this, online life and offline life. And I really hope that the Special Rapporteur's report will look at this. And of course, the issue of stalking, which I was really pleased to see included in the resolution on violence against women at the Human Rights Council, included as a way in which domestic violence happens. So again, I think it's great to see that so much progress has been made in terms of the kinds of violations that women experience, and now the next step is to begin developing a common language. Because even as I speak, there's many different ways to describe what I spoke about. And so I really hope that the report will help unpack this and bring in a range of different experiences. Okay.
Thank you, Jan, and also for bringing up Thank you. It's of course streamed, so that's why, even if you can hear me, I will keep quiet if it's not out there. Yes, and thank you for bringing up this blurring and the necessity of holding online and offline together, and that it also goes both ways. The online violence affects what's going on offline, and the other way around, what's going on offline affects what's going on online. And the example that you took about rape videos is a very concrete example of this. So just in my hometown, Uppsala, which is just north of Stockholm, we now have an ongoing court case about the rape that was put on Facebook. That is, of course, a second victimization when that is spread. So to hold this together and how we can find tools to see how violence is transformed and used in both these arenas. So I will now turn to Franny, who is coming into this discussion from a media perspective, and of course a freedom of speech perspective. So what are your inputs into the forms of gender-based violence that we need to address?
Thank you very much. As you mentioned, the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media looks at this issue very much from the perspective of freedom of the media, and we look at it as a specifically on safety of journalists and safety of female journalists. What we have noticed already a couple of years ago, is that female journalists, bloggers and media actors are actually disproportionately experiencing threats, harassment and intimidation online, and this has really a direct impact on their safety and on their ability to do their job. It leads to some of the women journalists not being able to use their social media accounts, being threatened, not being able to follow up on investigative journalism. And again, that's an important point. Many of the journalists who are receiving threats are working on controversial or difficult issues, covering topics that might be controversial. So we are, as a society, possibly losing very important voices in our media field. So this is a very important problem for us to look at it from the gender perspective. It's not, unfortunately, a new problem, but the new element is the online threat, and it somehow gives those perpetrators an idea or a feeling that they can get away with it. There is a anonymity behind it. And in order to try and examine this issue and this threat, we as an office did in 2015 a rather small but more qualitative survey where we interviewed many journalists who were subject to such threats and abuse, and some of them were kind enough to share their experiences and testimonial, which we published in this booklet that I have a few copies of still left. And it showed that these threats have a very serious consequences, and somehow one thing that made it even more poignant to me, the issue is that unlike traditional sort of threats, maybe you would receive, I don't know, an envelope in a post in your office, online threats you sometimes receive in the privacy of your own home, in the privacy of your house, in your bedroom. So somehow it also affects you mentally much more powerfully than other forms of threats. The other issue is that in many of such cases, the authorities don't take such threats as seriously as they would say other threats to journalists. So more classical ways of threatening. Online, quite often they're told, just switch off your account, don't use the internet for a while and it will go away. But that's not really a response or an answer. So our office and our representative tried to look at this issue and try and give a set of recommendations both to governments, authorities, states, media organizations and intermediaries of how to try and make some address to these problems. And one of the key issues for the states is strengthening the law enforcement capacities of the agencies to understand these issues and to follow up and properly investigate. Again, then look at the issue from another perspective. We were also afraid that many states may introduce new criminal laws or legislation which could be harmful to freedom of expression. So there needs to be also a balance to ensure that. There needs to be quite clearly, I think, more quantitative research in this issue, and that's, I think, we would very much also welcome the UN Special Rapporteur's report on this, and that's something also our office wants to look at from the perspective of female journalists. We know anecdotal evidence very much, but there is not much detailed research about the extent of this issue. Just for example, beginning of this month, the Dutch Journalist Organization published a survey showing an increase of mostly online threats, intimidation and attacks against journalists in the Netherlands, but they did not divide it between gender, unfortunately. So there's a very important piece of information that maybe could be got if we go back to the such surveys and so on. So I think that's important to look at it. From our perspective, it's also an important role here what can be done by media outlets themselves to protect their journalists, to provide support to journalists who are threatened. And of course the role of the internet intermediaries, which are also quite often the platforms that are being used to perpetrate such attacks and threats. They can also play a very positive role in helping to identify but also to ensure that there are some good practices online for the journalists to be able to turn to in these such cases.
Is there among these actors, I mean, are they willing to take on this journey and actually do something about it? I mean, what kind of reactions do you meet?
I think we are seeing very strong feedback, as it was mentioned from 2 years ago. Also, when we started up this topic and discussion, it's gained much more weight and importance and realization that it's a serious issue. And I think once, most importantly, states, because we are an intergovernmental organization, so those are, let's say, our natural counterparts, understand that this is also a very strong, not just human rights issue, but issue of freedom of access to information, to ensure that there is a plurality of voices on all media, then we are getting much more interest and, I would say, traction on this issue. So there is a very much, I would say, a growing understanding of the problem, but that's why I think there needs to be also a more quantitative research about this, how they're reported, such attacks, such threats, how they're analyzed, how they're processed after they're reported. There is a very serious follow-up that needs to be done on this as well.
Thank you so much. No, okay, now, sorry. And that brings us to Annika and how, I mean, because what, to bring this issue into the core of discussions about human rights, how can that be done from your perspective as an ambassador for human rights and democracy and rule of law? Where do you see the aspect of this?
Thank you, Åsa. And can I just say first that I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I was here 4 years ago before I was nominated as ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was a fascinating experience in many aspects, but also because we suffered internet shutdowns during a political crisis that is unfortunately prolonged, and I was part of an effort of actively lobbying the government against curbing freedom of expression, including on the internet. And you all heard the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, Annika Söder, talking about human rights and gender equality being absolute tenets in Swedish policy, including Swedish foreign policy, and that is the very strong foundational platform that I stand on. And now I was lost.
We're unlucky today. No, I don't think you need to do anything.
It's on. Oh, okay. Perfect. All right. Yes, like I was saying, gender equality and the promotion and protection of human rights are key elements in Swedish policy, including Swedish foreign policy, and that is precisely my mandate. I'm a free satellite, an autonomous resource at the Foreign Ministry here in Stockholm, advocating for how we view human rights, namely fundamental to peace and security and development, and also talking about the trends that we see in the world. Actually, the reintroduction of my position was a direct response to the very global negative trend that Åsa alluded to in the beginning of democracy under pressure and human rights being questioned and challenged, and the very system protecting human rights being undermined in the past year. Sweden has had a human rights ambassador since the 1980s, so there's a long string of prominent predecessors, sorry, that I have, but it was discontinued for budgetary reasons 5 years ago. But then the government saw it as necessary to reintroduce the position in order to ensure that Sweden has a very strong voice on human rights. Now we also have the feminist foreign policy, which is the foundation for everything we do. It's both a principle and a method according to which we work. You heard the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs addressing this, and this is the take we have on everything that we do, our comprehensive foreign policy engagement, including, of course, human rights. And a basic tenet in our take on human rights is that they apply equally offline and online. This is an established notion now internationally. We are proud sponsors, as you heard, of the Human Rights Council resolution that has now been adopted by consensus 3 times in a row. So one can say that it's an entrenched international norm now. So that is one of our starting points, that one has to approach digital issues from a human rights perspective, threading a careful balance between the opportunities and the challenges with the internet. But then the whole question of the gender lens to digital and ICT affairs, meaning women being the prime targets of abuse and violence online, and also women being left out from both access to the internet, but also from the opportunity to contribute. Here we spoke about the premise of the access to resources, representation, and participation of women according to the feminist foreign policy. So not to echo too much of what has been already said by my colleagues in the panels, I just came across some really startling figures. It says that 30% of Swedish female journalists have been threatened online during the last year, and a report by UN Women established recently that 73% of women have suffered cyber violence, which, according to my poor maths, or the number I was given, women are 27 times more likely as men to be harassed online. And in Europe, according to another report, 9 million girls have already experienced some kind of cyberbullying or violence, including my own daughter, who is only 13, which warranted a painful discussion with her about these things. And a last point, sorry for being somewhat general in my comments, but I just want to latch on what Dubravka said initially, or if it was you, Åsa, about women retracting or avoiding being active on the online as contributors to content, as bloggers, as journalists, as human rights defenders, for fear out of being targets of online violence that, as Franne said, often can translate into very much real-life violence, which again proves our premise that human rights online and offline is the same reality. This is simply not acceptable. And this is why Sweden is advocating so much for the safety of journalists, with a specific focus, again according to the feminist foreign policy, on female journalists. And here in the room I see Kersti Forsberg and Jan Romare from the Fojo Media Institute at Linnaeus University here in Stockholm, proud partners of us, or we are proud that you are our partners, to the government. In December, on the 250th anniversary of the world's first Freedom of the Press Act that Sweden celebrated together with Finland, Pia, you sit here, we hosted a workshop, a one-day seminar with the Foreign Minister Margot Wallström and Fojo on hate and abuse of female journalists here in Stockholm, with representatives of journalists that have been under attack from all regions of the world. And this was the culmination of a global campaign for showcasing how the free word has served Sweden and Finland for the past 250 years, but also an opportunity to put the onus on this novel phenomenon of gender-based violence. Sorry for being lengthy. Thank you.
No worries, and thank you so much. Very good points. One thing that I want to pick up from all of you, that you have all mentioned in one way or another, is how violence is silencing, how voices are left out and voices are lost in this process. And this was also one of the really main topics on when we were gathering last year, women human rights defenders that were working on a very local level in different countries, and also countries where the shrinking space is acute. So And another connected to that was that they said that the online violence as gender-based violence at large, and we have come quite a long way in talking about gender-based violence at large, not as individual, not as demarcated events, but as systematic. And they were saying that this knowledge that we have about gender-based violence being systematic is something that we also need to bring on when we talk about online violence. Because it's not, we tend sometimes to talk about individual trolls that are, but they pointed out that it's very often a systematic strategy to actually silence women. What do you say about that, and how can we use the knowledge that we have about the mechanisms of gender-based violence when we also talk about
this is a very good point.
taken?
Thank you. This is a very good point, because realities are that we are living in a world of gender inequalities and discrimination against women, and we are transferring this to online world. We are using what we have as our realities at home, and this is going online. And unfortunately, realities in a world today is that gender-based discrimination against women is systematic, it's ongoing, and it's not decreasing. So we are not seeing, in spite of different methods that we are using, that we do have significant decrease. But it is important to collect data and to see really where we are in terms of different forms of violence against women. But let me also address something that you are mentioning in terms of differences between online and offline violence, and how we are using what we have developed in this area of human rights related to prevention of violence against women, and how we are combating violence against women. There are some misconceptions that only physical violence is real violence against women, and psychological violence and harm that is done to psychological violence is not sufficiently seen as real violence against women. And we are now seeing that those psychological harms that are done through internet are really pushing back into the direction of not using internet as a tool for empowerment. And I think that SDG agenda, what was mentioned this morning, is very powerful agenda that is for the first time calling for empowerment of women and achievement of gender equality, but for the first time also target is elimination of violence against women in private and public life. And this public life and private life is online and offline. We are all spending much of our time online, and now our private life is happening also online. And all those forms of gender-based violence against women could happen online, because gender-based violence is any form of violence that results in or is going to result in on physical harm, but also psychological harm or sexual harm or even economic harm with respect to women or different human rights of women. And here I would like to invoke what we have in global treaties in this area, in CEDAW Convention, in regional treaties, Belém-do Pará Convention, Maputo Protocol, and the new Istanbul Convention, Council of Europe Convention on prevention of domestic violence and violence against women. They are providing us with a framework. And now, for example, in Istanbul Convention, that is now giving us maybe new provisions on sexual harassment. This sexual harassment could be applicable also on online and offline harassment. And this is also applicable to other regions and other treaties that are going to be interpreted in that manner. CEDAW Convention as a global treaty on elimination of discrimination against women and violence against women is giving us also directions how to address different forms of violence against women. And maybe also to invoke Belém-do Pará regional Latin American Convention that is clearly stating that there is a right to life without violence, right of every woman to life without violence. And this is repeated also in Council of Europe Convention. So we have to find how to secure that place of empowerment that we are finding now at the internet that could really transmit women's rights as human rights all over the world, to empower women to use those mechanisms that we have, including my mandate, because there are different procedures that could be used at global level and regional levels, and how to use this as empowerment to tool and not as something that is pushing women back, that is restricting their positions to use their rights. So I think that we are really at a level of challenge with respect to all of us, and that we need to secure future for all our generations that are coming and using those internets in a very fast manner. I also have granddaughter, 13 years old, and she's all the time on all those iPhones and everything. And how they will live in secure society that is giving them possibility really to enjoy benefits, to be included, not to be left offline. We have heard that many communities all over the world and women are not yet able to use internet, and how to use those opportunities but without being challenged through different forms of violence, restrictions, attacks on their personal life, and even crimes committed through internet, because this is now this new channel through which crimes could be committed. For example, threat of death, threat of rape, it is criminal offense that should be prosecuted at the national level, be it offline or be it online. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I mean, that's to bring online and offline together, and also to bring the private and public together, because we have, I mean, in discussions, and this is something that feminists have been doing for ages, to trying to say that we have to talk about the private and we have to talk about the public at the same time. We cannot separate these two arenas. And when talking about gender-based violence online, this is a very pedagogical example of how it's completely impossible to separate private and public. Annika, you had a comment on.
Yes, I just wanted to connect very briefly to what Dubravka said about sorry, I think I lost the thread here because I had a second thought. I'll be back in a second.
Okay. Does anyone of you want to
say
something?
Sorry, okay.
Sorry. And then I will bring
to keep two thoughts in my head at the same time.
Just 1 minute, Annika.
Yeah.
I will give you also the opportunity to say, give some more comment, and then I will bring in you. So the mics are there, so you wave for Anna. There is only one. Okay, the mic in singular is there, so you will. Yes, please, Annika.
Yes, just to state the obvious, that the structural discrimination that exists all over the world against women and girls, of course it plays out also on the internet. It seems to be a perfect image, mirror. One could have hoped that on this novel arena, new attitudes, more modern takes on what benefits a society. In our view, it is gender equality, because it benefits both men and boys and women and girls. But it doesn't seem that way, because research proves apparently that as more and more people over the world gain access to the internet, more and more women and girls become vulnerable to gender-based violence online. So there is this perfect reflection of the discrimination that already goes on in real life. And that also means and implies that society's response or state's response must be the same as for violence and abuse and threat in real life. It's again this total parallel, that it is the state's responsibilities to respect their international obligations and national obligations under human rights systems for respecting girls and boys and men and women's human rights online. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Jan?
I just want to pick up on a few points that were made, so it's not necessarily in response to your question. The first is around the notion of strategies to silence women. I think often we think about individual women in cases of domestic violence relationships. But this is also a very deliberate strategy for women human rights defenders. And I think there's many people in this room who can speak about it. Related to this is the use of the very laws that are meant to be protecting us to do this. Yeah, so we see an increasing trend in cyber harassment laws being used to silence women who are vocal about issues that threaten states. And there's many examples. You are here from Uganda. Nigat is here from Pakistan, and I would really hope that you'd speak about that. So this is definitely a trend. So we've worked for 10 years to say states need to respond, women need to be protected, and they're saying, okay, we'll protect you by shutting down your speech, by developing legislation that criminalizes the kinds of things you say. So there definitely is work we need to do around the nuance of the kinds of things we're asking states to do. That's the first thing. The second thing I would really like to problematize is this notion of anonymity as a bad thing. Because in women's rights work, anonymity saves lives. And I really think that this is a question that we need to upfront and talk about. A couple of weeks ago, I was reading about a story about a woman who had managed to evade an ex-partner, but he found her on Facebook 3 weeks after Facebook's real name policy was launched. So these are really very specific examples that I think we need to problematize and begin to respond to. And the last point I want to make is around this reaction to criminalize all kinds of behavior. Criminalization is not necessarily what everyone wants. And surely we also need to be talking about what kinds of remedies, what kinds of redress are available in a world where we cannot actually escape this. Our colleague in the DRC told us a story about how a neighbor's boy sent a girl a message. It was it caused lots of harm and concern in the house. They reported it to the police, and the police, well, we have to arrest them. That's not what you want to do. Often it's people who you care about. You want to find other kinds of solutions. But that's not to say that some acts are criminal, as you have said. And so I think a conversation also has to be had around where is the line? Where is the line between hate speech and harmful speech and speech that is insightful? And we need different kinds of responses and different kinds of communities involved in those conversations. Now, this really is the last point, which is often we get told working in violence against women, on online gender-based violence, that we are interested in closing the internet down. We don't want to see content that is violent, that is harmful, etc., etc. Whereas our colleagues working on sexual rights have an interest in keeping the internet open. And this really is a false dichotomy, because we want an open internet for everybody. And so really I'd like the conversation now just to unpack things a bit more, unpack the complexities of an issue that really requires so many levels of intervention, because there's so much at stake for so many of us.
Thank you, Jan. And let's do that. Let's unpack the complexity. Do you want to?
I just want to maybe add on the issue of the state's response and the laws, which I think it's very important in terms of that this issue needs to be treated as seriously as any offline threats and violence. And this, I think, requires a very strong education of the law enforcement actors on all levels, from the police, prosecutors, investigators, judges, and so on. It really needs, in a way, a mind change on all those levels. First of all, sensitivities about the gender aspects of the violence, but also the fact, I think also more importantly, almost that violence online is equivalent to the offline violence, which does not often happen. And then the other element is about the legal aspects. We have very good criminal legislation, as Dubravka already said, in most countries about what is a threat.
No, I didn't say this.
No, on threats, what are threats, what constitutes a threat to life. This is illegal in practically every country, and it should be applied online to offline equivalently. And I would be very hesitant and careful about creating any new pieces of legislation. As you pointed out, this can be used to silence controversial voices or voices that are actually adding to the debate and discussion by prohibiting certain amount of speech. And it's very clear under international laws and international regulation what constitutes harmful speech or calls to violence, which can be prohibited, and it's not part of free speech, and what is essentially free speech. And that's where we need to make some clarity as well.
Thank you so much. Now, who has the mic? You have the mic. But please introduce yourself before you...
Well, thank you very much. My name is Pia Rantala-Engberg. I'm from Finland, as Annika already mentioned. I'm the cyber ambassador at the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Well, first of all, I really would like to thank all the panelists for their very interesting and important messages today. And it's interesting the aspect of straight responsibility, what we need to do with legal means, with all these official acts. I'd just like to bring another kind of a more personal perspective here, and it's how can we have a mindset, I mean, a change of mindset in bringing up our children to this new world. I mean, it is very important that we learn our children, you know, our daughters, and why not the boys as well, so our sons, about internet literacy in you know, that how do we behave in the net? It's not, well, it's very kind of self-evident for us adults, but when a small girl at 10 years old starts to pose, you know, and sending, you know, as an email attachment, you know, a message to her friends, it can be viral. And there we go. This is kind of a very simple example, but we need to start this at homes. It's not only, you know, in the adult world, and like Annika Söder was referring to, that we from the 50s and 60s generation, we are immigrants to the digital society. But it's but we also need to bring up our children. It's not in our genes yet, you know, to be able to have the right behavior in the internet world.
Thank you so much. We'll have a couple of more questions down there, and perhaps you will. Oh.
Hi, I'm Geeta Misran. I work with an NGO called Kriya in India, but we also work globally. Some of us here are kind of forming our own little panel in response to some of the things that have been said there. We've divided up some of the issues. So I just wanted to make 3 points. One is, if you look at violence and look at the issue of online, I think it would be interesting to go beyond the traditional ways in which we talk about violence. Harassment, stalking, because a lot of women who we work with report how mobile phones are now controlling, and it's happening in every country, even with middle-class people, where their movements are being, you know, they're under surveillance. They have to report back to their families where they are, what they're doing, how long they're out for. If they're not back by 10 o'clock, they have to say 10:30. I mean, and is that another way of making women kind of reproduce themselves as wives, as mothers, within a normative framework of a marriage and a family? So that's one thing. Whereas their daughters are using the internet to form other communities that may be empowering, looking at issues of sexuality and pleasure. So that's one thing. The second point is, who is a woman? We've talked about gender-based violence here, and we always refer to gender as women, whereas, you know, effeminate boys are also being harassed. Effeminate boys are being beaten. There's the new emerging genderized, sexualized man in war that is being raped because he's seen as an emasculated male. So I think we have to complicate what we mean when we talk about violence against women versus gender-based violence. So just a little bit of that, especially if we're going to produce a report. Because we don't want to increase protection of women. We want to increase protection of their rights. We don't want to increase respectability. We want to increase respect. And I think these differences have to come out. And my last point is this issue of intersectionality. We really talk very much in vertical silos where class, poverty, context, women don't live their lives in this one thing. And so if you were raped, your life is over. I mean, that's what we present to women. That's what they're made to think. And sexual harm seems to be on the top, and women who are losing their hands in the mining industry or in my country scavenging shit seems to be lower down. And we've made domestic housework somehow a respectable form of work, and sex work kind of be this horrible thing that happens to women because they're selling their bodies. So I think we just have to think about it a little more in a complicated way. Sorry about that.
Thank you. One more question, and then...
Valentina, Bosnia-Herzegovina, One World Platform. Just to continue on the complexity, more than on the complication. When we talk about women, violence against the women, we talk about sexuality. Because women, or anybody that is not conforming, the body is there that is shamed. And if the voices are raised, the body will be used to be shamed, with all the different spectrum of offenses that I will not repeat, but I think any language has many. And they are always attached to the female. And it can be animals, it can be anything. But I think that our sexuality is part of our expression. And when we talk about violence against women, we need also to link it to a freedom of expression. Because what we express there is not just a collateral essence of ourselves, but freedom of expression, freedom of express our sexuality, our body are part of our ideas. Because there is this tendency to think the freedom of expression is about ideas, but ideas are portrayed by people, and people on the internet are portrayed by the way in which they portray themselves or are reflected. So I think it's really essential that we link. And we see this everywhere, also in the little country of Bosnia, where there is a lot of moralization around anyone. It's a journalist, it's the domestic, the old woman, the young girl, the girlish boy. It's freedom of expression, the freedom of think yourself and put yourself there in the different way. Because otherwise what we have now, we have people producing a self that is mainstream, that it's a real name, that it's conformative, that it's hetero, that it's all what the good people think that you have to be. And then there is this other anonymous self, the fight for diversity, risking. Thank you.
Okay. I think we will stop there for a moment. We have the question about changing of mindset, the tiny little question about changing of mindset. We also have the point here about intersectionality, which as a parenthesis was also something that we very thoroughly discussed in the development talk that we had with human rights, women human rights activists, and how it's necessary to see the intersecting forms of discrimination also when we talk about gender-based violence online. And then also to see the link between ideas, people and bodies, and to bring in bodies into the online arena and that discussion, which is also connected to your comment, Jan, on that we need to unpack the complexity here. So who would like to comment on these? And please, now we are running out of time, so let's all be short so that we can have many voices also from the audience. Okay. Annika?
Very, very... Should I... Which one? This one? Okay, great. Very, very briefly, a comment to Pia Rantala Engberg's question about starting with the minds. Obviously, I mean, legislation is one thing, criminalization, but with every societal change, to make it durable, you have to work on the minds. And today we have this massive avalanche of imagery and messages to our youth. And how can we help them make sense of all that? I think that the starting point must be the Swedish one. Trying to engage men and boys in every effort for gender equality in its greater ramification. This is what we do in political dialogue. This is what we do in development cooperation. Discrimination against women and girls in any form it takes is not a women's issue. It's not just an issue of rights. It's an issue that concerns the whole society. And fortunately, my kids have been able to benefit from the new internet literacy component in the Swedish curricula in primary school. And I also know from experience that now in the comprehensive sexuality education, there is a considerable chapter on online issues of this.
Thank you. Okay. At first, hello?
Yeah.
Okay. First, I think that panel has done like really great work there. But I think it's pointing to something that's really important, and that's about who is in the conversation. Who are in the conversations when we're talking about developing policy and legislation around the internet? Are we here? Are people working at the different intersections present in those spaces? Very rarely. Who's involved in discussions at the ITU? Who's involved in discussions at ICANN? The absence of bodies, as Valentina speaks, is also felt very concretely online, precisely because our ideas and inputs and concerns are not represented in those spaces. And I think that is exactly how we bring out the complexity. Because until now, it's been, this is the problem and this is how we need to respond to it. But not everybody's there, so the response is missing things. So when the response is, I want to know who is harassing me, it's to say, there's no more anonymity. But there's no one saying anonymity saves lives. So I think it really is about making sure that many more of us, are occupying those spaces very visibly with bodies that disrupt the space. That's the first thing. The second point, actually, no, that's all I'll say, and I'll give someone else a chance, because I can go on. So.
Just a little bit. Is it working? Yes, now it's working. I would also like to thank you for your comments. They are extremely important because those internet platforms should be used to express diversity and to express everything that is happening in current world, and also to focus on new areas that are related to protection of human rights of all. And when we go back to this issue of stereotypes, that we, in a world that we live in, we do have many stereotypes with respect to role of women and men, and we are producing that in different school books, curriculums, and so on. And it's still happening. We are speaking about obligations of states to change, to modify such harmful stereotypes, to change their way of producing different curriculums, education for girls and boys. But it's still there. And internet is giving us opportunity really to go faster, to change it faster, because we are now having this opportunity to offer a new world to young generations. They are living in their homes, they are going to schools, but they have also internet. And but we also have to, in the same time, fight what is happening offline, in regular life. All those stereotypes that are related to role of women, to role of men, as in patriarchal societies. We are seeing this in so many societies all over the world. In Western Europe also, and we have to fight that. We have to change it, but in a speedy manner. And internet is finally giving us possibility to reach to those communities in a much faster manner, to send what are key human rights messages in those treaties, not to have those treaties only for specialists that are dealing with human rights, only for those that are lawyers, only for those that are dealing with international law, to have it for everyone, to know what are their rights, and it is extremely important. With respect to young boys, to persons with different gender identities and so on, they should be included in all protection schemes related to human rights, because they are having the same human rights, they are protected, and internet should be used to spread the message that they are protected. My mandate is receiving communications with respect to violence going on in different communities against, for example, women human rights defenders, and it is really important to use possibilities that we have today. It could be sent through internet, so there are so many possibilities, and there are mandates that are already there that could respond. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a few minutes, so I will let you, if you keep yourself brief, then we will have more voices, and then I will let you have the final words, all of you. So please collect the voices from the audience. Yes.
My name is Courtney Radge. I'm the Advocacy Director at the Committee to Protect Journalists. And I think this has been a great discussion, very key, interesting issues brought up, lots about kind of the problem and the scope of the problem. But I am frustrated that it continues to be about let's describe the problem, because I think we've been successful in this community in putting this on the agenda, and your opening remarks actually highlighted that. So I'd love to see more discussion about solutions, and I'll just note that that conversation has started, and also specifically on the research element, there's a lot of research being done, but what's not happening is bringing it together. There are a lot of country level and quantitative research, so I would put that as maybe a challenge to CETA or the OSCE to be a venue for bringing that together.
Thank you. We have one here, and then in the back. here.
Yeah, well, coming from an authoritarian government, our recommendation is beware of the state, because sometimes it's state-sponsored cyber attacks that targeted women among journalists. And they attack journalists in general, but the women are viciously attacked by the president and then by their trolls in regard with their femininity, their bodies, and all that kind of criticism. So we are very worried when we hear we are going to tell the state to do this thing or the others, because in our case, the state is the main perpetrator of abuse against women, and that includes revenge porn by state's troll center. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just, while you are running back, I just want to comment on that, because that was really our ambition. And I think that we have touched upon what we need to do here. But in the final, yeah. Yes, that was where I wanted the mic, because I want to spread.
Can I just, like, very brief?
Okay, but I just want to finish this, because now keep to what you want to be done. Okay?
Yeah.
And also who you want to do things.
Sure.
But
so
extremely brief, and then in the back there.
My name is Nikat Dad, and I'm from Pakistan. I work for Digital Rights Foundation. Just one comment about the men, working with men and young boys. I think it's good to work with men, but we really don't want men to hijack our battles. That has been happening for years and years. Another thing that I want to say, that we localized the solution in Pakistan. We started cyber harassment helpline, and it has been very successful. I feel that we don't need more charity, we need solidarity.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm going to try to be very short. I'm an activist in Brazil. I was born and raised in Portugal, so my relationship with the internet, with being activist and a woman, completely changed when I moved from the north to the south. And during this conversation here, I realized that although you have made amazing efforts to change things in your reality, it doesn't really match at all the reality that people like countries like Brazil live. Because, for example, when you say that you build recommendations for governments, states, and that authorities sometimes don't recognize the certain threats. In realities like the South America, authorities are the threat. The states are our biggest enemies. So instead of someone was asking for solutions, I don't have all the solutions. I'm trying to find out. I'm there for a short period of time. But it's a country where our government allows that a video from collective gang rape could go on the internet. It's been 1 year that one 16-year-old girl was raped by 30 men. 30. It was allowed to be on Facebook, and authorities didn't do nothing about it, not even punish the aggressors. And my point is, it would be important that we could have like some solidarity from other countries. Like, please, if you have so many great policies politics being improved in other countries, then try to push and press these countries that in the South, for example, that don't have the same relationship with fighting gender violence, don't receive Michel Temer when he comes to Sweden, for example, because his government is the one that is killing people using internet to persecute activists. If you're like a sexual and reproductive activist, like internet is something that is not safe for you because it can be used by authorities to go after you, for example. So if we are talking about globally, let's amplify our visions and our experiences, because we are on a level that it doesn't really match the reality of activists and women in the South.
Thank you so much. I think we will move the mic to this side so that we have voices from all areas.
Thank you. My name is Fadzai. I'm a constitutional lawyer and political activist from Zimbabwe. Now, I just like to touch upon what was said about silencing of voices. What I find coming from Africa, where offline or online, the fact that a woman is speaking out, and I include elites here, I'm not talking about rural women, I'm talking about very educated women, it's countercultural for women to speak out. And it gets worse when you go online because, you know, the culture does not support women speaking out. So the problem is obviously compounded by harassment, by all the gender-based violence we've spoken of. What practical tips can you give women in that position to encourage them to speak out? Because I think most of them become silent because they don't know what other response there can be. So do you block? Do you engage the troll? Do you ignore them? What practical tips can we give women to empower them in an age of online harassment?
Thank you. A couple of more questions from this side. Back there, and then, yeah, and we have one behind there. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tanya. I'm from Central America, Costa Rica. And I wanted to just pick up on what she just said. And it's very concerning for us in the sense that how or what practices, or if there's real examples where international treaties and conventions that are above constitutions, including, you know, in our countries, can control crime actions on internet. And this is a concern, like how can we, because the discourse is the discourse, but in practice, we don't need those videos raping a girl. We don't need that. That is a crime. That is something that should not go through even a national process because there's treaties, there's conventions. So I want to know, even in the space of the UN business and human rights, if internet service providers can action based on these conventions and not necessarily based on national jurisdictions. So that's just a thought.
One behind there. And then unfortunately I have to close. And if you allow me to take 5 more minutes of your lunch break, is that all right? For the panel to give their closing remarks. Okay, if you just have to run, do it now. Okay, please.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Koo. I come from Malaysia. I think the assumption in the discussion is that the rule of law offline is much better than the application of law online. And I would want to really question that. Because I think when you ask me what I wanted to see, I think it's a case of the rising tide raises all boats, as it were. And if you really want to have more respect and more adherence to the rule of law online, you have to actually see that offline as well in everyday life. I come from Malaysia where you know, there is everyday threats to women in the name of religion, in the name of all sorts of other things, national security, whatever. And sometimes when it comes to top-level personalities, nothing very much is done to protect them. So they are not even being protected offline. How is it that, you know, we can imagine or expect that they're going to be protected online? So I think if you want to address the situation in some countries, I wouldn't say it applies to all, you really have to look at the situation of rule of law, even in the offline environment, and to improve that, and then it will expand to cover the online environment as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for brilliant comments. And now I will start with Jan. And in your final remarks, all of you, please concentrate on the how and the who.
Okay.
Jan.
Okay. I must say, I did expect this when I asked for complexity, so thank you, everybody. I think that's really great. These really are the difficult conversations that we need to begin to have with the degree of honesty that I think came up today. So 2 things that I'm sure so that others will also mention things. I think we also need to build our capacity to circumvent the state in many ways. And I think what's coming out of Latin America is precisely these kinds of initiatives. I was at a session yesterday, and Maka was talking about developing autonomous feminist networks. We need to build our capacity to take the tech and hack it and make it work for us. And that's excellent. And the question is, where does the money come from? Yeah? So that's number one. The second point that I want to make is about the value of building movements and strengthening movements and working within different kinds of movements. Because I think the solutions are potentially out there, and what Nigat was talking about in terms of solidarity is not only amongst ourselves, but amongst people who are doing interesting, small little bits of work. And again, the question is, how do we find them? How do we bring them in? And how do we have the kinds of conversations that are going to make us feel so uncomfortable that we have to find solutions?
Thank
That's
you
it.
so much.
Sorry.
Great and concrete. Please, Annika.
Yes, I'm a government representative, so I won't be able to be as much concrete, I'm afraid. It's sort of inherent, but just to latch on to the question from the colleague from Zimbabwe, what we are doing is, obviously, in the name of our feminist foreign policy, we have a particular focus on defenders of women's human rights and women human rights defenders in the broad sense. So we have increased our funding, our allocation for funds to civil society that work for these issues this year. And then also in multilateral forums, I have Frida here from our UNESCO representation in Paris, but also in Brussels, in Geneva, and New York. We work continuously to highlight these issues in the name of that policy, in the very sort of normative framework of multilateral work. Also, we have just adopted a new human rights policy for the government. The old one was 10 years old, and it was kind of dated because of the novel threats and developments. And there, gender, freedom of expressions, shrinking democratic space, civil society space are also key. And then very briefly to our colleague from Portugal/Brazil, our Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs mentioned it. Just 3 weeks ago, Sweden published online and practically also 135 country-specific reports on situations on human rights, democracy and the rule of law in regions all over the world. And Brazil was one, and there are particular chapters on women's human rights that have been reinforced since the last time we did this, the last batch. And there is also internet and online security and human rights there as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Annika. And Franne?
Thank you for pointing out, need for not just to talk about it, but to have concrete proposals and solutions. And one of the proposals by our former OSCE representative on freedom of the media is exactly, it's a set of recommendations to the states. I already mentioned the legal aspects of that, and of course media literacy comes very high on that agenda, that the states should encourage education and literacy, even to an extent that we teach our children how to behave in public. Why don't we teach them how to behave on an online sphere as well? From the perspective of safety of journalists, we have also a set of recommendations to the media organizations, how to support journalists who are facing online abuse, to create a company culture that does not tolerate such abuse against their own colleagues and staff. Content moderation on many websites is also a good way of ensuring that journalists who are writing are not trolled, as we say, as part of the articles. Then it's also partly a role of internet intermediaries, and that's maybe something very practical. It's very clear that terms of service by most internet intermediaries are very strict when it comes to abuse. I mean, if you actually read them, and they do take down abusive content, and maybe sometimes we would have the issue whether it's a freedom of expression issue or not, bordering, but the internet intermediaries do take down offensive and content, and they should be encouraged to take down content which is illegal, and the terms of service are often much stricter than national legislation in many countries. So that's something that can be much more developed, how to use that and how to maybe make those terms of service a bit simpler to understand for users it would be an important element. So these are clear sets of recommendations. I mentioned we have it in a publication already if anybody is interested as well.
Thank you so much, Franne. And the last word goes
Thank you. I think that with respect to solutions, we really have to join different forces, and you are also going to play an important role because you all are participating in this process. We are all, as individuals and as personalities that are using internet, able to focus what are problems, so to focus on concrete cases. And if there are cases like mentioned case in Brazil, I think that it is important to challenge specific government in specific case and to launch that case on international level. You said speak up, expose things that are going on in terms of violation of human rights. And states are violators of human rights, so they should be accountable. They should be exposed at the global level, at regional level. And it is important to protect women human rights defenders and activists who are doing that through that process. But for solutions, we need to work together. We need to find what is already there in terms of global agendas, regional agendas, and national laws. And I think that national laws are not yet there, that in terms of what we have in national laws, we have to really examine what is still needed in order to protect women better in cases of online violence that are aggravated in this sense that internet is really going in different direction of exposure of this offline violence that is now reaching the whole world. So I think that challenges for all of us. So please send me your recommendations, send me your research, send me whatever you have in this area. And as a mandate holder that is now trying to focus on human rights perspective, I will really try to produce recommendations that are building on other recommendations coming from different organizations and coming from individuals that are seeing how they are not able as individuals to resolve the problem, how they need the bigger community, how they need United Nations and regional organizations to give them this kind of way to change in the future. And we are I think, addressing this process, but we are not yet there. There are many challenges in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. And now, please answer to Dubravka's invitation to send in material research recommendations from all of you, and I'm pretty sure that you will get a lot and a diverse picture of recommendations that I'm also sure that the outcome of this will be a brilliant report, and we are very much looking forward to it.
Thank you. And concrete cases also.
Concrete cases. And unlock the complexity. That was your your takeaway. And I would like to quote the human rights defenders from last year again, because I think it's brilliant. It's very simple, but it's brilliant. And that is to come together, speak louder, and be more visible. Thank you so much for listening, and a big, big hand to our prominent panel.